a junior English major and Slavic Studies minor, and I was lucky enough to go on this trip, um, which was kind of amazing because I've never been outside the country before. And I think kind of what shocked me the most was the street dogs and how they were way better behaved than my own dogs, who were like trained professionally, and these dogs were so sweet. So kind of just a mix of meeting the people and the dogs and kind of seeing how they intertwined and like related to one another was really special. And going, I think, up into the mountains and going to the kind of bazaars and street markets was really cool because I got a mignon, um, who was apparently my baby, um, and kind of just seeing the art and the beautiful craft work that the people were making and selling on the street was so cool and kind of personalized to them and their country. I really appreciated. It was like we were so well taken care of, having like food provided, transportation. We got stuck on the mountain for like 4 hours, but it wasn't even that big of a deal, and everyone had a good time. Um, I thought that kind of the whole adventure of it was amazing, being in very hot climates and then all of a sudden going to somewhere where it was snowing. And I think like the most I'll remember from the trip is the people, like Nino, like David, like David, our drivers and our tour guide and our SRAS coordinator. And I think a big part of this trip was that it allowed us to kind of form deeper relationships with our professors, because normally when students study away or go somewhere, their professors don't come with them. So I think it was really cool to kind of have that kind of grounding, people, two people, Petco and Andrea, to kind of come with us. Um, and as for, I guess, my favorite moment was like waking up early, taking cheese from the breakfast that I wasn't eating because I'm vegan, and giving it to the street dogs. And some of the dogs would just refuse it because they're just so well fed that they don't want cheese and they want meat.
My favorite day was the day that we went to Kakheti, the wine region of Georgia in the eastern part of the country. It was such an action-packed day. I think that was the day we did the most. And I remember being exhausted by the end of the day. We started by going to a local chorchella shop, and we got to sample the Georgian candy, and we tried like dried figs and dried persimmon, and that was so much fun. And then after that, we went to a small family owned farm, and we got to make a bread called shoti, or mother's bread, and that was another amazing experience. There was a big like concrete drum in the middle of this small little room, and you had to slap the bread on the side of the cement. After rolling it out, it's shaped like a crescent. You slapped it on the side, and then in about 10 minutes, your bread was all done, and we got to eat the bread with homemade cheese made by the bread makers who were teaching us how to make it, and it was delicious, as all Georgian food is. After that, we had lunch at one of the most gorgeous places I think I've ever been. It overlooked the mountains. It was outside. I think the weather it was a picture perfect day. At the end of the lunch, the clouds had all cleared out and you had a perfect view of the mountains. And it was just so amazing to experience that with our whole group. And after that, finally, we got to the main event of the day, which was going to a winery and learning about the process of making Georgian wine, which is some of the oldest wine in the world. That was super cool to see the differences between the European style of making wine and then the Georgian style, where you have these big clay pots in the ground called kuferi, and they're in the ground, and they ferment all the grapes in there, and it was super super amazing to see how that traditional style of making wine is carried through for centuries. And then we got to taste some Georgian wine, which was pretty good, and we were all exhausted by the end of the day.
One of my favorite parts about the Georgia trip was we went on this day trip to do traditional Georgian dancing. It was super cool just to get like a little bit of that culture that we wouldn't have really gotten if we'd just gone as tourists to Georgia. We were taught the dances, and then we got to see some people perform. And on the very last day, during like our final dinner, there was a lot of traditional Georgian dance going on there too, and that was cool to see as well.
One very interesting experience that we had in Georgia as a group was going to the communal bathhouse. So we had a separate little area for just our group where we all went in together to the different baths in there. One was like the most famous part, which was a very, very hot bath that was sulfur water. And then traditional, you're supposed to stay in there for I think 15 minutes, and then you switch to a cold bath, and then like took a break and drank some tea.
Towards the end of the trip, we went to Uplisihe, which was this old village that was literally carved into the side and on the top of this mountain, and we could still see where old bedrooms were, and there was an apothecary, and we could tell because there were like a bunch of shelves carved into this rock. We could see where the dungeons were.
The trip to Georgia was really an unforgettable experience. Personally, that was my first time traveling abroad, and I'm so fortunate to have been able to do so with my fellow Russian students. I feel like I learned a lot that you can't get just from reading the textbook. A lot of things that I learned on a daily basis were through communication with other people, and it was really interesting to hear about people's experiences living in another country. One of my favorite trips was the trip to Kazbegi. It was a pretty long day trip when we went into the mountains about 6 miles from the Russian border, which was really, really cool to see just how close we were to the neighboring countries in the area. As a Slavic Studies student at Con, I was already aware of the colonial nature of the Russian language. However, I never really saw it in action. I had understood that Russian was the language that was enforced by the USSR, but I never, as I said, saw that like as exhibited through real people. So in Georgia, kind of seeing the way that people associated their identity with language was really interesting. Seeing how some people would only speak Georgian or some people were comfortable speaking Russian. I never really knew how political a language could be, and so seeing that firsthand, I think I have a better understanding of Russian on a global scale.
The once colonized countries by the USSR are no longer colonized, so we should not expect anyone to speak a language that is not their native tongue.
So me and my mignon are actually heading back to Georgia this summer because of my experience with SRAS this spring break. I contacted them afterwards and I was like, I have to go back. So I'm going on a little scholarship back to Georgia in Batumi to kind of continue my study of Russian, but also just experience the culture of Georgia. And I'm actually contacting organizations to work with the street dogs while I'm there for 6 weeks. So I wouldn't have done that without this program. I wouldn't be studying away, period, as a junior. So that's really cool. Of course he's coming on the plane.